How do you stay safe in Ecuador?
En una zona turística del norte de la ciudad, la víctima quedó.
Asesinaron una señora de una que vendía repuestos de...
Ecuador was known as one of the safest countries until 2019, with a homicide rate of 6.7 per 100,000 inhabitants. But now that number has shot up to 38.8 homicides per 100,000 people. Some sources even suggest it's at 44.5 per 100,000. Therefore, if you're planning on visiting Ecuador, safety is a must. So in this video, I'm going to give you my top safety tips for visiting Ecuador. In other words, this is the ultimate Ecuador safety guide for travelers or for anyone in Ecuador. And I'm even going to include some safety tips that I don't hear enough people talk about and that you need to know. But I have two disclaimers before we begin. The first is that I will be focusing on safety tips related to Ecuador based on my over 10 years living here, as well as information that I've seen from news, as well as other people who have had safety related issues. And the second disclaimer is to remember that everyone's experience is and will be different. While some people have a perfect trip and nothing bad happens to them, there are others who aren't as lucky. So paying attention and being prepared is never a bad thing. And with that out of the way, the first safety tip I have is to establish a safety contact. But what is a safety contact? A safety contact is going to be the person who you're going to check in with on a daily basis to make sure that you're doing all right. You should also share your location with this person in all places you go out to for added security. You could just send a message with the name of the city that you're at, such as saying, I'm in Quito or I'm in Guayaquil, but ideally take advantage of the share location feature that most, if not all, social media and communication apps have to offer. If they offer real-time location, even better. If you don't want to constantly send your location, then consider setting up Find My on your iPhone or Find My device on your Android phone. And don't forget to set up your safety contact as someone who can constantly see your location using one of these services. But now that we're mentioning phones, the next tip that I have is that you have to understand that phone and electronics culture in Ecuador is most likely not the same as it is in your country. If you're wondering what that means, then let me give you some examples. In some countries, you can walk around while casually using your phone to send a message or take pictures. You can't do that here because you risk becoming a target for petty theft, which is much more severe than it sounds, but we'll talk about that later on. In some places, people put their phones away in their back pocket or sticking out of their pants. You can't do that here unless you want to be the easiest target for pickpocketing. It might be commonplace for people to walk around with big over-the-ear headphones in other countries or carrying around other forms of visible tech, like a camera. You cannot do that here because it makes you quite susceptible to getting robbed. So, what can you do? Well, there's a few things that I recommend, but some of them are a bit more demanding than the others. The first and easiest thing you could do is not carry any tech at all. But since this does include your phone, it ends up invalidating the first tip that I gave about having a safety contact. So it's not exactly the most recommendable option that I have. My second option is a little bit better because here, instead of carrying around an expensive $1,000 plus phone or carrying around a ton of expensive camera gear, you can just carry around a cheap phone with a good camera and use that to keep in touch with your safety contact, as well as take pictures in all the touristic places you visit. And if something does happen to it, you would much rather lose a cheap, maybe $200, $300 phone than losing $1,000 plus phone or losing a ton of camera gear. Wouldn't you? But maybe a cheap phone isn't enough. So the next recommendation that I have is to use pants or shorts that have zippered pockets. This way, it's harder for a pickpocket to stick their hand in your pocket. They'll have more of a challenge and you'll probably notice if they try to do so. And the best thing is, it doesn't just protect your phone, but it also protects your wallet or any other thing that you're carrying around in your pockets. Now, assuming you're carrying around a bag And regardless of whether this bag is carrying around tech or things that are or maybe aren't important to you, I do recommend that you make sure that your bag is slash proof. At least the straps, so that people can't slice it and yank it off your back. And I also recommend that you put locks on your zippers to make it very inconvenient, if not impossible, for robbers, pickpockets, or any type of criminal to get into your bag. And while we're talking about bags, I do recommend that you make sure you put your bag in front of you instead of behind you. That way you can constantly monitor your bag and make sure no one's doing anything to it. But if you want to go a step further, then I do recommend that you walk around with someone. In other words, avoid walking around alone. By having someone with you, you can take turns monitoring, supervising the situation. So basically, while one person is taking a picture or maybe looking at something touristic, the other person can take care of the things or supervise and make sure that no one is trying to sneak up on you. Now, as for what I do in regards to tech when I'm going out, I always try to keep my phone in my pocket, and if I'm carrying around a laptop or some other form of tech, I'll keep it in my bag, and I'll only take it out when I'm indoors. Unless I'm recording, in that case, I try to have someone with me, so that way, like I said before, someone can supervise while I'm doing my touristic sightseeing content creation thing. Since the recommendations I just mentioned all have to do with things happening while you're walking around, the next few tips are going to be related to walking around in Ecuador. Did you know that the most common robbing method in Ecuador is typically two guys pulling up on a motorcycle next to you and asking you for your valuables? Well, if you didn't, now you do. So an interesting tip here is to always walk in the opposite direction of traffic. By doing this, you complicate the robber's trajectory on a bike, and it also helps you escape since the vehicle wouldn't be able to go against traffic, unless the street is empty, of course. And that's where I also recommend avoiding walking around empty streets or areas. While it may be quieter, it also puts you at risk of being an easy target of thieves and kidnappers. Now, you might wonder here if you can do like I mentioned earlier and walk around with someone, and then maybe you can go into this empty area. And first I would ask you, why do you want to walk around an empty area in the first place? Then I would tell you that no, even if you're walking around with someone, it can still be very dangerous to go in an empty area. And now you might ask, well, what about a group of people? Surely a group of people is much safer than just two people. And once again, I'm gonna ask you, why do you wanna walk around this empty area? And then I'm gonna tell you that no, unfortunately, a group of people isn't gonna save you either, because if you're a group of foreigners who look a lot like foreigners, then you're just gonna end up setting yourself up to be a group of targets, easily robbed targets, in an area where it's gonna be very easy to rob you. But once again, this only applies to that empty area, which I keep telling you not to go to. If you want to go to a touristic part of the city, or maybe a shopping center, someplace indoors, then yes, being with someone or a group of people is going to be excellent. I won't say that it won't make you a target though, because people will see a group of foreigners and be like, gee, I wonder where they live. But I digress. It's still good to be with a group of people as long as you're not putting yourself out there in a place where it's going to be very easy to be robbed or kidnapped. And as a final sort of walking around tip, if you are in a colder part of the country, you could consider using hoodies in order for people not to be able to identify you completely as a foreigner. But this will immediately backfire if you're in a warmer part of the country, because why are you using a hoodie in a warmer part of the country where it's probably freaking hot? So basically, use a hoodie if you want to avoid being noticed in a colder part of the country, but don't use a hoodie if you're somewhere like in the coast and it's very hot, especially in the beach, because it just wouldn't make a lot of sense. Heck, in a warmer part of the country, you might identify more as a foreigner if you're using a hoodie. So now that we've covered safety while walking around in Ecuador, let's talk about vehicular transportation in Ecuador. So first, let's start off with renting a car for all you Torettos out there who want to come drive around in Ecuador. Don't. It is very possible to rent a car here, don't get me wrong, and if you have a ton of faith in your driving skills, like go ahead. But if you're not willing to put up with aggressive driving, and aside from the safety that comes with that aggressive driving, there's also problems with the rental companies here as well. Like if you're not willing to put up with those things, then I really don't recommend driving here in Ecuador. If you can't control your need for speed and you do want to drive, then remember, people here run red lights, people don't respect stop signs, people don't use turn signals, and there's a lot of motorcycles that try to get up in front of you while you're driving. So you're gonna put yourself in a lot of risky situations if you drive here in Ecuador. But be prepared for it if that's what you want. As for the situation with the rental companies, they are very strict about how good condition their car is. You could go out with your vehicle and literally take excellent care of it, perfect care of it, and come back, and because maybe you drove past a rock that shot up and like scratched it the tiniest bit, they might cause problems for you because of that. Now, for everyone else who enjoys their sanity, but still wants their privacy, there are 3 choices that you have in regards to getting around in a vehicle, which are a taxi, an Uber-like service, and of course, a private driver. But wait a second, each of these do come with some specific recommendations that I'm going to give you now. Starting with the taxis, they're pretty much everywhere. You can grab one almost anywhere, even in front of the hotel or the place that you're staying at. But in order to avoid being the victim of a kidnapping in a fake taxi, it's better to call one from one of the official sources. If you're wondering which one is the best or who you should call, it's really gonna vary from city to city. So the best thing you can do here is talk to the receptionist at the place you're staying at and ask them to either call one for you or give you the number to call one yourself. I would recommend you ask them to call one for you and for them to write down the information so that then you can write it down and send it to your safety contact. But of course you can call them yourself. You're just gonna have to know a little bit more Spanish in order to be able to communicate with the taxi service. Now, as for the Uber-like service, there actually is Uber in some cities, but most cities have an Uber-like service. So depending on the city you're in, you once again want to ask the receptionist at the place you're staying at to tell you which service they have in the city or maybe the options that they have. And then afterwards, either you use the app yourself or you ask them once again to get you a vehicle so that you can get from where you are to where you want to be. But something important to note is that here you don't want to wait outside for this Uber-like service or even the Uber, because other vehicles might see you waiting outside and go up to you and say, hey, I'm the vehicle you're looking for. And then afterwards, you end up being kidnapped. So once again, take note of the information of the person who's coming to pick you up. When you talk to this Uber-like service or even the Uber, have them tell you their name first, so that way you can see if it coincides with what you wrote down. And then afterwards, you can safely take your vehicle. Now, when it comes to private drivers, this is probably the safest and best option you have when it comes to vehicular transportation, but only if you did everything right from the starting line. Keep in mind that the starting line for your Ecuador trip isn't the moment that you arrive in Ecuador, but it's all the prep you did before you came to Ecuador, including watching a video like this. And remember, if you're getting value, make sure to like the video so that way I know that it's being useful to you, and also subscribe if you want more information in regards to Ecuador travel. But going back to the situation with the private driver, remember if you try to get one while you're here, everything is going to be rushed and it's most likely not going to work out the way that you want it to. Most of the time you won't find someone available, and if you do, it'll probably be in less than ideal conditions, such as the person arriving late, the person overcharging you, or worst of all is there'll actually be reviews of that person being bad, but since you didn't look them up ahead of time, you couldn't even see that that was actually the case. That's why my recommendation is to check out the Ecuador travel group and any other Ecuador group that pertains to the city that you're visiting for your trip. In the groups, you can search for private drivers and see the reviews people have given, or check the people who have commented offering their services. You can also ask specific questions and even ask anonymously if you have any privacy concerns. And of course, the group is useful for asking a ton of other questions to a ton of other people who have had a ton of Ecuador experience, such as the one that you want to have for your trip. And to end the topic of transportation safety, and because I know someone out there is going to say, but what about the buses? Let's talk about the buses. There have recently been some unfortunate circumstances in regards to bus travel. Not to say that these circumstances haven't happened similarly before, but it seems like they're being a little bit more prevalent now. And I'm going to share an example of such a circumstance from a comment that I read on the Ecuador travel group just a few days ago. Hello to all backpackers. I would like to share a horrible experience. You can avoid it if you're gonna travel from Cuenca to Mancora, Chiclayo with Super Semeria company in Cuenca. They robbed 6 people today in the night bus, and they are really professional and organized. There's a guy in the bus who is collecting the tickets, and you think he works for a company. No, it was a guy who stole everything. Drivers spoke with him before departure, and this guy jumped out from the bus before the border to Peru. When the police came, they told him that they knew nothing and the guy is not on the list of passengers. So basically, there was no one. The bus had a camera, but as you can expect, they were offline until the border of Peru. All of them cooperate together. Be very careful, and if you can, avoid the night bus. I knew this route was dangerous, so I had my backpack tied to myself, to my legs, and it still didn't help me. They probably used some kind of drug to make us fall asleep for a while. Safe travels, and if you can, avoid this route and company. Unfortunately, things like this and worse can happen and do happen. I remember seeing a video where there was a bus that was being robbed at gunpoint, and even after everyone collaborated, they gave the robbers their things, the bus driver was shot and lost his life. But if you still insist on taking a bus, whether this be an intercity bus or the normal city buses, then make sure you have your bag really close to you, like hugging it if possible, and have a lock on your zippers, make sure the bag is slash proof, and in worst case scenario that something happens, like robbers coming on the bus to rob people at gunpoint, just give them your things. There's no item worth more than your life. Like, it can be worth $10,000, but you only have one life. So don't risk it just to protect your things. But one thing that you have to keep in mind is that if you're carrying a lot of things, like a normal bag and maybe some bags that you're carrying around as extras, then they're not gonna let you put that all on the bus. You're gonna have to put it under the bus in this compartment that they have. And there they have a security system where they know whose bags are whose by some tags that they put on them. But if you want to be even more sure that nothing happens to your things under that bus, like them magically disappearing, then definitely put a lock once again on the bags, on the zippers. Also, if you have an AirTag or if you have some kind of tracking device, put it inside the bag so that way if it does magically disappear, then you can at least track it. If you want to risk tracking it, because you never know what can happen when you track these things. And the final 2 safety recommendations that I'll mention about the bus travel is, once again, remember the buddy system. If you're with someone, then while you're sleeping, they can watch you and watch your things. And while they sleep, you can watch them and watch their things. And I do really recommend avoiding bus travel at night, especially if that post on Facebook is accurate, because if you fall asleep, then you'll be easier to rob. And at night, unfortunately, you typically want to sleep. And unfortunately, at night is also when it's harder for the police to get to certain places on time to be able to stop these things from happening. There can be checkpoints, but it's luck. And if you don't want to leave it up to chance, then definitely just travel during the day. So now let's move on to the next section of safety tips, which will cover more miscellaneous things, such as nightlife. If you want to go out at night, that is okay. But there are some precautions that you need to take. First of all, obviously, since we just talked about not going on a bus at night, don't go out too late when it comes to the nightlife in Ecuador, because the later you go out, the less safe it actually is. The default hour for when it starts to get dangerous is around 9 p.m. Anything past that and you're in God's hands at that point. But if you want to go out even past 9, then there is an exception to this recommendation, but it has quite a few conditions. Those of which being, first of all, you have to go out with someone. Second, that person has to be from Ecuador, of course. Third, they have to be from the area that you're gonna go out in. Fourth, they have to know Spanish, of course. Fifth, they have to have lived there for a long time. That way they know a lot of people. And the final condition is that if you guys do go out, then you have to go out in a vehicle. That way getting there and getting back home or to the place you're staying at isn't gonna be a problem. Now, this next part is really important, so I really need you to pay attention. Have you ever heard of scopolamine or escopolamina? If you're from outside Latin America, then maybe you've heard of it used as a medicine. But if you're from Ecuador or Latin America, then you know that this is a drug that is used to incapacitate people, which basically makes it so that the criminal can do whatever they want with you. There have been cases of this drug mainly used at ATMs or at bars, but honestly, it can be used anywhere, at any time, so be very cautious. One tip that I have in order for you to avoid being caught by this horrible drug is to avoid talking to strangers. And even more so, if these strangers try to show you something. This is a typical scopolamine technique where the substance will be on the thing that they're showing you, and once it gets close enough to your face, you'll pretty much be drugged. And in regards to stopping for people, also don't stop for people who ask for your help, because sometimes this is also a technique where they'll stop you, one person will ask you for help, and then another person will swoop by and pickpocket you. But going back to the scopolamine, if you want to avoid being scopolamined, then you could wear a face mask, though it is very uncomfortable. But by wearing one, which technically you do have to wear one at this point in time, but by wearing one, you can avoid being scopolamined at least a little bit more than if you weren't wearing one. But if you don't like face masks, and in general, a really good tip that I can give for your safety, you should definitely avoid predictability. Basically, the act of being predictable and going to the same places all the time, using the same routes. Because if you live here, or if you happen to be here for an extended period of time, and you're always taking the same route, believe me, there is going to be someone who notices. Unfortunately, not your crush, but definitely someone who's going to notice and who's going to want to take advantage of the fact that they know what your routine is, whether this be going to the same place or doing the same thing, and that could put you in a very precarious situation. The best way to be unpredictable is definitely to switch around your form of transportation, unless you have a private driver, which in that case you should be super safe, unless they decide to track your private driver, which poor guy if they do. But for the most part, if you one day go walking, another day you take a taxi, maybe another day you take a bus, maybe another day you go in the Uber-like service, you should be able to avoid, for the most part, any kind of trouble as long as people don't know exactly how you're getting around. And of course, if you take different routes in the case that you're walking, that should also help keep you safe. But remember, everywhere that you go and everything that you do, you should be telling your safety contact that you're going to these places and doing these things. And you wouldn't be able to tell them if your phone were not charged. So while this might not seem like much of a safety tip, believe me, having your phone charged can very much influence how safe you are. So if you're worried about something happening, Ecuador has had blackouts and we don't know if we're going to have more in the future, you might want to have a power bank in order to be able to charge your phone in case things go awry. Though if power outages do start happening again, I do recommend just not being here for when that happens, or going to a part of the country where maybe they're not as prevalent as they are if they're very prevalent in the place that you're at. But remember, having your phone charged isn't just to keep in touch with your safety contact and make sure they know your location. It's also to take pictures. But those pictures should definitely be sent to your safety contact. And not only that, but if you're planning on uploading them to social media, really consider not uploading them at the moment that you're at the place. Like for example, if you're at a coffee shop, maybe don't upload the picture to social media that you're at that coffee shop while you're there, and consider uploading it after, just in case there's someone who saw you or who managed to get your information and they see that you're posting that you're at this place at this time. Doxing, this whole situation of people being really parasocial and wanting to find you, it can happen. So you don't want to put yourself out there too much if that's not your job. If it is your job, like when you talk about content creation, of course, there's no going around it. But if it isn't, definitely don't post the things while you're at the place. You could, and it could give a real idea of where you're at that moment, but it gives a real idea to too many people, and that might not be convenient for the situation that you want to be in. At this point, you might think that all of this is overkill. Worrying about your phone getting robbed, worrying about people maybe finding you at some place in the street. It might seem a lot like petty crime that is waiting to happen, and you might not worry too much about petty crime, since you might think, oh, if someone tries to rob me, I'll fight back. But as I mentioned earlier with the situation with the bus, and as I mentioned earlier on in the video, when it comes to petty crime, you can't really underestimate it. Here, a lot of robbers don't really care about the consequences, so they're not afraid to put a gun in your face and risk your life and even take it if you decide to fight back just for defending your phone. And if your concern is targeted violent crime, first of all, I would have to ask you, what are you doing here if you're being targeted for violent crime? Because most of the time, people who are targeted for violent crime in Ecuador are people who are doing very shady things, such as dealing with gangs, or they're very heavily involved in drugs. So if you're not doing those things, you don't really have much of a reason to be concerned about that. Except for what I mentioned earlier, the only targeting you'll have is more for petty crime, being robbed, if you've been tracked, if people get to know your routine, maybe things like that, which could turn into more violent crime if you decide to defend yourself, which is why I keep suggesting not to defend yourself, just give them your things. But there's really no reason for you to worry about extreme violent crime unless you happen to be the person who is targeted for it. And if you're being targeted for it, then you're obviously not doing something right. And I know there's an argument to be made for wrong place, wrong time, because there are situations where this violent crime isn't just, oh, you go, you find the person, you shoot him, and it's over. Sometimes it is a whole shooting that happens in order to get rid of a person or a group of people. And you could go out and find yourself in a situation like that. But once we start thinking about that, and I say this a lot of the time, when you start thinking about every single little situation where you could go out and something could happen to you, then you're just not going to live a peaceful life no matter where you are. Because shootings aren't even as common here as they are in other countries in the world, such as the United States. There's an ongoing dark joke here where people say something along the lines of, the United States is known for school shootings. And I know it's heavy, I know it's dark, but people say it because they see that it's very frequent over there, and when people make fun of or they attack the violence here, it's very quick to get shot back to, oh, but over there you guys have school shootings, which we don't have over here. But I digress. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that you can't worry about every single tiny thing. You can, but if you wanted to avoid every single tiny thing, you'd have to stay indoors. And at that point, why would you come to Ecuador or to another country? Why would you even travel in the first place? But if you want to really like guarantee your safety and have the safest time that you can here in Ecuador, I do highly recommend the private driver, the guide option, a private guide option, because driver, guide, the person who's going to help you during your trip, that person, like I said before when we made the conditions for the exception, they know the place that you're going to, they know the country, they know the language, they have a vehicle, they can cover all the spaces that you yourself, as someone who doesn't know what the situation is like here, probably couldn't cover if you were by yourself. At the moment, I would personally only be able to recommend 2 guides. One of which is Darwin Paredes, who is more stationed around the area of Baños, and Luis of Ecuador, who can help you if you're in Cuenca. If you want to get in touch with either of them, I'll leave their information in the description down below. If you're someone who's visiting Manabí, specifically Portoviejo or Manta, then you can contact me and I might be able to help you out. I can show you some things that are tour specific, but I can also show you things that are related to life here in Ecuador, in case you want to stay here for a prolonged period of time, or if you're planning on retiring here at some point in the future. If any of that interests you, then my email will be in the description so that we can get in touch. And if you'd like to know some do's and don'ts that aren't specifically about safety so that you can be better prepared for your trip to Ecuador, then I did make a video about that recently and you can check that out next. If this video was helpful, then consider liking and subscribing. It helps me out a ton. You can also support me by becoming a channel member or send some money my way through Buy Me a Coffee. Which reminds me, channel members and Buy Me a Coffee members, thank you. Your support helps make it possible for me to keep making content like this, so remember, you guys are the best. That's it from me, take care, and as always, ace out.